It's Ted Drozdowski with Premier Guitar, and it's time for Road Dog, my monthly conversation with y'all about stuff that I've experienced on the road. It's kind of a sharing experience, I hope. And speaking of sharing experiences, today's topic is sitting in, which can be a surprisingly complicated thing, because one, it's an exercise in human dynamics. Two, it's kind of a great way to affirm friendships or musical kinship. It's a way to grow as a player, and unfortunately on the downside, it can also really be a shit show. If it can ruin the musical experience for listeners and for fans and for players, and really the musical experience is there for the fans and for the listeners. It really is something that goes beyond the musicians themselves. My advice, in order to make sitting in as positive experience as possible, is to always just be kind. It's also a good way to go through life. Don't show up at somebody else's gig with your gear and your ego on your shoulder. If you haven't set that up in advance, certainly, if you don't know that person, as a player and listener who's logged a lot of time in the blues world, where sitting in and the concept of the jam are sort of cornerstones, I know that some players have a tendency to confuse a club gig with a jam, and there's a big difference, Somebody's gig is never a jam. Any artist worth his or her salt is going to have a specific plan for whatever performance they have that night, even if the plan is to keep things loose, pick songs on the fly, and spin the music in a certain direction. It's still a plan, and when they're able to execute that plan effectively, that's when they can do their best shows. But the flip side is that there's sometimes when a sit-in can be a fantastic treat for everybody, Like if Warren Haynes sits in with my favorite band and blows me away, I'm just as thrilled about that as anybody else, But again, the guiding principle is to be kind, be polite, be nice. Don't ever try to muscle your way into somebody else's stage by insisting. And I would even suggest that you don't ask to sit in unless the performers are friends or you and they acknowledge each other in some kind of musical compatriot, fashion. For years, my band, Scissormen, has had a strict no strangers sit-in policy. Although I've had the pleasure of being able to, share the stage with others who are friends and who I knew musically were kindred spirits from time to time, and that's been really great. I've also had some horrific experiences, but on the positive side, I've been able to play with people who are above my league, and that's been kind of a thrill and an honor. So again, this can go either way. You have to have a compass about it. In blues, in particular, I find you get bombarded with strangers asking to sit in. And I really want to be nice about it, but I had to institute a no sit-in policy for strangers after a particularly embarrassing night in Waltham, Massachusetts, when a group of like 5 college kids kept badgering us to let their friend, who they said was a great drummer, sit in. Finally, after like 35 minutes of this, we finally decided to let the guy sit in. It's like, okay, they all say he's a great drummer. They were going to be surprised. It's going to be an awesome time. And the guy could barely play. He had trouble keeping time. He kept dropping the sticks. When he hit the kick drum, it was like someone randomly whacking a mattress. It just sounded completely horrible. And kind of to make it even more, and I'm trying to play with this guy, because at that time my band was a duo. These days it's a trio, but it was a duo. So here I am saddled with this guy on drums. And the whole thing had just completely fallen apart. And who walks in but Jerry Portnoy, who's one of the world's greatest harmonica players, played with Muddy Waters on tons of recordings, has a harmonica instructional technique book out there that's very popular. So Jerry walks in because that's the night he decided to see the band. I was just mortified, and as a result, we decided that from there on in, if we didn't know somebody who wanted to sit in, it just wasn't going to happen. And parents, here's like a little sidebar for you. Don't bring your kids to somebody's gig expecting them to sit in just because they're the best 12-year-old zither player on the planet. I had one experience with this that was especially, being in the blues world, but there were a lot of sort of junior players of various kinds who were heralded. This is something that happens a lot. There's a lot of stage parents there. But I had this one particular encounter in Cambridge, which was really odd. I had very carefully planned and orchestrated a show at a place called the Overdraft, which is now called Atwood's. And it was Jimbo Mathis, who was doing one of his first post-Boston gigs after the Squirrel Nut Zippers, as the opener, and I was headlining with my Scissorman Little Big Band, where I'd augmented the band to like 9 pieces that night, which is already something, if you normally do a duo, that you have your hands full with. Anyway, I was standing outside before the gig started, and this guy was hanging out with like about a 10 or 12-year-old kid, and I was chatting with him, and I think I may have said casually, "So what brings you to the club tonight?" He goes, "Oh, well, we're going to sit in, and my son's going to play." I'm like, "Really? Oh, is he playing with Jimbo?" Because I know one had talked to me. He goes, "No, he's playing with Scissorman." And I said, "Well, that's news to me. That's my band, and no one asked me about it." and it's just not going to happen. You know, I'm sorry. And the dad was really kind of furious, you know, but I had no idea who this guy was. He'd never reached out to me. And I just kind of turned to the kid and said, man, I'm really sorry, but, you know, I can't do it. I've got 9 players. It's a special event. But if your dad and you want to contact me in the future and we make a specific arrangement, you know, then you're welcome to come play. But we need to arrange this kind of thing in advance. I hope you understand. And, you know, he said he did, and he was pretty cool about it, way cooler than his dad. But that's the thing, you know, if you don't know someone you want to play, at the very least, following the Be Kind principle, contact them in advance, you know. I had another gig in Pennsylvania at this club we played with some regularity. It was a really cool place, kind of out in the boondocks, and it had this great juke joint vibe, and we always had really good teared-up shows. And one night, the proprietor, who was a sweet guy, kept insisting that the local hotshot guitar player, who had just moved back from a stint in Nashville, play with us. And I finally decided, okay, well, second set, we'll let him come up and play. Well, this guy comes up to play, and the minute he plugs in and we start off the song, he just started playing this ripping solo. And basically the whole tune became a guitar solo for him. Even when I was singing, and when it was my turn to take the solo, he just soloed through my solo. This guy just stood up there and ripped through licks for the whole thing. And it was pretty obvious why he had come back from Nashville. Because if you step all over somebody else's toes all the time, you are not going to really be able to cut it here. Anyway, that was another bad experiences, but I've also had some really great experiences with people sitting in. Not only the many times that I played with friends and musical kindred spirits, but when notable players were introduced and people who I hadn't known and maybe knew by reputation. But the thing that was interesting about all these notable players is that they never asked to sit in without first getting an introduction and without also being humble about it, which was really endearing and kind of surprising because in my eyes they were so great, you know, that I was humbled to be able to be in their presence. I did a number of tours with John Sinclair, who was the sort of great counterculture figure and American patriot, manager of the MC5. Anyway, I did some tours with John, who was a performance poet, and at one of them during the show at the Kerouac Festival, David Amram was introduced to me by John. They were old friends. And David is a great reed player and composer, fantastic jazz artist, recorded the first spoken word jazz album with Jack Kerouac. Anyway, David was just a charming man, and he said, well, do you mind if I sit in? And I said, no, I'd be honored. You know, what do you want to do? When do you want to do it? He said, well, if you don't mind, I'll just ask you. I'm going to sit right here in front, and I'll just ask you about, you know, if I can come up. So we're at this particular crazy spot where John is standing back and letting me and Mark Sullivan, the other guitar player, just doing this insane stuff. I think I had my foot on my twin reverb, and I had the Stratocaster's pickups pointed right into the front speaker, and I was laying on the whammy bar and was just feeding back. And David catches my eye and goes, I'm like, yeah, I nod my head, and he comes up. He has no instruments in his hand. I have no idea what he's going to do. I'm thinking, well, maybe he's going to sing or vocalize. He's got this cool idea for improvising. And he reaches into his pockets like a, you know, a hitman and pulls out 2 penny whistles and puts the penny whistles to the microphone and starts blowing intensely into these penny whistles. And I swear to God, he was the Jimi Hendrix of the penny whistle. And I just stopped playing for a second. It was amazing, world-class Coltrane-level penny whistle playing. Totally blew my mind. That was one of those great situations. And through John, really, I've had some other great situations, too, where I was able to play with Daniel Carter, the great improviser in New York, and with Thurston Moore at a gig at the Nuyorican Cafe. These amazing things, you know, that the world of sitting in opened to me, and that was pretty terrific. I also know that the first time I sat in with R.L. Burnside, which I didn't know until I'd already known R.L. for 3 or 4 years, and in fact, the first few years I knew R.L., he didn't even know I played guitar, because I don't really feel a need to inflict myself on somebody else's beautiful music necessarily. But anyway, the first time I played with R.L., it literally changed my life, and certainly my musical thinking, and a lot of personal thinking too. After that, I also had the opportunity to play with R.L.'s grandson, Cedric Burnside, and Kenny Brown when they were coming through Boston, where I was living at the time, playing as a duo at TT the Bears. About halfway through their set, or toward the end actually, they invited me up to play. I hadn't brought a guitar that night. And I was just really kind of exploring open tunings in a more considered manner at that point, you know. And Kenny goes, oh, grab that guitar over there. I think it's tuned in standard. And I picked it up and hit a chord. And I'm like, man, this doesn't sound like standard to me. And Kenny goes, well, I think that's open G. And I said, oh, damn it, man. I really can't play an open G at all. And Cedric Burnside goes, well, no time to learn like the present. 1, 2, 3, and counts off the song. Man, it was terrible. I felt like a monkey throwing feces on the crowd, until about 2/3 of the way through, when I finally started to kind of figure out the note positioning and was able to carve out a nice, rhythm melody figure and sheepishly eke my way toward the end of the tune. But the great thing about that sit-in is that I was impressed with the immediacy that if I'm going to begin playing this music, I'd better expand my repertoire and get more open tunings under my belt, which I did. So anyway, sitting in, it can be awesome, it can be awful, but I think the key is to not impose yourself on other people's music, to be a kind person, to be invited, to play with kindred spirits, and then it's a beautiful experience, not only for you, but also for the listener. And man, that's all I got to say today, except I hope y'all have a great time out there on the road, and wishing peace and good things to my fellow road dogs out there. Until next time, take it easy, and feel free to drop me a line and let me know what you think about all this.